The sun was dipping behind the distant hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The rancher, a man used to living alone for many years, was walking along the edge of his land, his boots pressed into the dry earth with a quiet crunch, and the only sounds were the rustle of the wind through the tall grass and the distant call of a hawk. He had spent countless evenings like this, tending to his animals, checking fences, and making sure everything on his ranch ran smoothly. Life was simple, predictable, and mostly lonely, but he had learned to accept it. He liked the quiet, the way the land felt steady under his feet, and the way the horizon seemed to stretch endlessly, untouched by the noise of towns or the rush of strangers. As he approached a bend in the small river that ran near his property, something caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, perhaps a shadow cast by the trees or a swirl of dust rising from the ground. But then he saw her. She was standing by the riverbank, her figure small against the vast landscape. Her clothes were worn and dusty, and her hair, dark and long, fell around her shoulders in a way that suggested both pride and exhaustion. She seemed to be staring at the river as if she were listening to it, or perhaps gathering courage to do something. The rancher slowed his pace, careful not to startle her. He had seen travelers before, some lost, some in trouble, and sometimes offering help could be dangerous. He tightened his hand around the reins of his horse, unsure whether he should approach or keep a distance. But there was something in her stance, something quiet but unyielding, that told him she was not a threat. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady but gentle. "Evening," he called, keeping his distance. The woman turned her head, and for a moment, the rancher noticed the weariness in her eyes. She nodded slightly, her expression guarded but polite. She didn't answer at first, only took a small step back from the river, as if she were unsure whether the land was safe. "Are you all right?" he asked, dismounting from his horse slowly, not wanting to seem threatening. The woman's eyes met his, and in that brief glance, he saw fear, caution, and something else, an unspoken plea. I just need a place to stay tonight," she said softly. Her voice was calm, yet it carried the weight of someone who had traveled far and faced challenges he could only guess at. "Just one night. I don't mean any trouble." The rancher hesitated. It was unusual for someone, especially a stranger, to appear on his land so late in the day. The frontier was not always kind to those who wandered alone. There were dangers, wild animals, harsh weather, and sometimes less friendly people. Yet, when he looked at her, he felt a tug of something he hadn't felt in years. A sense of responsibility, and perhaps a quiet hope that he could help. He gestured toward the barn, a sturdy building made of aged wood that had weathered many storms. "I can give you shelter for the night. Food, too. But you'll have to follow the rules here. Nothing is stolen. Nothing is broken." His voice was firm but kind, carrying both caution and a genuine offer of help. The woman's shoulders relaxed slightly. She nodded and murmured a small, "Thank you." There was no pride lost in her acceptance, only relief, and perhaps the faintest hint of gratitude. Together, they walked toward the barn. The rancher noticed the way her steps were careful, as though each movement carried a history he could not yet understand. Inside the barn, he led her to a corner where a small bed had been set up for emergencies, often used for workers passing through or unexpected guests. He gave her a blanket and directed her to a small table with food he had prepared earlier. Fresh bread, some cheese, and dried fruit. The simplicity of the meal seemed almost ceremonial in its warmth. She sat down slowly, the exhaustion evident in every movement. As she ate, the rancher quietly attended to his chores, making sure the animals were fed and the fences secured for the night. From time to time, he would glance toward her, noting the way she ate carefully, as if conserving energy. There was a dignity in her presence that was hard to ignore, a silent strength that suggested she had survived hardships most could not imagine. Night fell fully, and the barn grew darker, illuminated only by the soft glow of a lantern he had lit earlier. The woman finished her meal and looked up at him. "I am grateful," she said again. Most people Most people would have turned me away. Her voice carried no accusation, only quiet truth. The rancher nodded. I've lived long enough to know that kindness matters. Even small acts. He paused, unsure if he should speak more. You're safe here tonight. That's all that matters right now. She smiled faintly, a small curve of her lips that seemed to carry years of unspoken stories. For a moment, the silence between them was comfortable, filled with the soft sounds of the barn, the shuffling of hay, the low murmur of the animals, and the distant whistle of the wind through the trees. Hours passed, and the rancher continued his usual work, occasionally checking on her to make sure she was comfortable. There was a quiet rhythm to the night, one that made the vast emptiness of the land feel less lonely. For her, it was a rare moment of safety, a pause from the uncertainties of travel and life on the road. For him, it was a chance to see someone's strength and resilience up close, without words or demands, only presence. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the barn windows, they had both grown accustomed to each other's company. She no longer seemed like a stranger, and he no longer felt only the weight of solitude. In the quiet of that shared space, a connection had begun, small, tentative, but undeniable. The rancher prepared a small breakfast, and she ate slowly, still conserving energy but showing signs of ease. When he stepped outside to tend to the animals, he noticed her watching him, her gaze thoughtful. There was something unspoken between them, a recognition of mutual respect. He realized that while the night had been meant to offer her shelter, it had given him something unexpected as well. A glimpse of a world beyond his own solitude. A reminder that even in the vast emptiness of the frontier, connections could be found. As the morning sun rose higher, painting the land with golden light, he knew that her time on the ranch was meant to be brief. But for that one night, they had shared something rare, a simple act of trust and kindness, which neither of them would forget. In that small barn on the edge of the frontier, two lives had touched, and something quietly profound had begun to grow. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of dew from the river and the earthy scent of the ranch. The rancher had risen early, as he always did, to check on his animals and make sure the land was in order. But for the first time in years, he noticed her presence in a new way, not just as a visitor, but as someone whose life had quietly become a part of the morning rhythm. She moved about the barn with careful steps, tending to the small chores he suggested, sweeping the floor, arranging the hay, and helping feed the animals. He watched her, noting how naturally she handled herself. There was no hesitation, no clumsiness, only purpose. She had the patience of someone who had learned to survive, to adapt to situations, and to handle responsibilities quietly. She never complained, even when the early morning chill made the air sting her skin or when her hands became rough from work. As they worked side by side, conversation began in small, careful steps. She asked questions about the animals, about the land, and about the daily routines of the rancher. He answered simply, not revealing too much, but enough to make her feel included. She listened intently, her dark eyes reflecting curiosity and a thirst for understanding. There was an ease in her presence, a calmness that slowly began to ease the rancher's own habitual solitude. "You work very hard," she said softly one morning, her voice carrying warmth beneath its quiet tone. "I do what I must," he replied. "The land doesn't wait for anyone, and neither do the animals." She nodded, her gaze steady. "I understand. Life is never easy. But there is a way to find peace in work if you let it." The rancher paused at that, surprised by the simplicity and wisdom in her words. She spoke as though she had seen much of the world already, yet had not lost hope or kindness. He felt a sense of respect growing for her. Quiet, unspoken, but strong. He realized that while she had come to his land needing shelter, she had brought something far more valuable. A sense of perspective. A reminder that even hardships could be met with strength and dignity. Days passed, and the initial caution between them began to fade. The rancher found himself looking forward to her questions, her quiet observations, and the small but meaningful conversations they shared. She had a way of noticing things he had overlooked, of pointing out beauty in ordinary moments, the way the sunlight touched the river in the morning, the sound of birds settling in the trees, or the pattern of frost on the wooden fence. Her presence added a new depth to the rancher's life, one that he had not expected but welcomed nonetheless. One afternoon, while fixing a fence near the edge of the pasture, he noticed her watching him with a thoughtful expression. She held a small bundle of herbs she had collected along the riverbank, explaining their uses in simple terms. Her knowledge surprised him. She knew which plants could soothe a sore throat, which could help heal cuts, and which could provide flavor to a simple meal. He admired the way she spoke with certainty, never boastful, only confident in her own experience. "You have a way of knowing the land," he said quietly, glancing at her. She smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I grew up with it. You learn to listen, to pay attention, or you don't survive. The land teaches those who are willing to learn." He nodded, impressed. Her words reminded him of his own father, who had once taught him similar lessons about patience, observation, and respect for the land. There was a subtle connection forming, not just through work, but through shared understanding. The rancher realized that trust was building between them, slowly but surely, and that it was more than mere necessity. It was recognition of each other's worth. Evenings were quiet and reflective. After the day's work, they would sit by the fire in the barn, the flickering flames casting shadows on the walls. Sometimes they spoke, sharing stories from their past, carefully chosen and gently spoken. She talked about her family, the life she had left behind, and the journey that had brought her to his land. He listened without interruption, fascinated by her resilience, her ability to endure hardships with grace. "You've been through much," he said one evening, handing her a cup of warm tea. She accepted it with a nod. "We all have our struggles. It is how we face them that matters. You've been kind to me, and that matters more than words can say." Her gratitude was simple, yet it touched him deeply. He was not accustomed to being appreciated for kindness. It had always felt like the natural thing to do, not something deserving praise. Yet her words carried sincerity, and for the first time, he felt a subtle warmth in his chest, a recognition that his actions, however small, had made a real difference. Over the next few days, the rancher found himself observing her in ways he hadn't expected. He noticed the careful way she moved, the gentleness with which she interacted with the animals, and the quiet determination in her eyes when faced with tasks. There was strength in her presence, a sense of self-reliance that was rare and compelling. She was not just surviving, she was thriving in her own way, adapting to a new environment with courage and dignity. One afternoon, a storm approached, dark clouds rolling across the sky with surprising speed. The wind picked up, rustling the trees and sending a chill through the air. The rancher hurried to secure the animals and the barn, and she helped without hesitation, carrying tools, tying loose boards, and offering suggestions that were practical and sound. Together, they worked efficiently, side by side, until the first drops of rain began to fall. They sat in the barn afterward, watching the storm lash against the wooden walls, the sound of rain on the roof, the occasional flash of lightning, and the low rumble of thunder created an atmosphere of quiet intimacy. She looked at him and said softly, "Life can be harsh, but it also shows us who is willing to stand with us when it matters." He met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. For all the years he had spent alone, he realized he had never truly understood the meaning of partnership, not just in work, but in life. This woman, who had come to his ranch seeking only a night's shelter, had already begun to teach him lessons about trust, resilience, and the quiet strength found in shared experience. As the storm passed and the air cleared, a rainbow appeared over the hills, faint but visible. They both paused to admire it, a silent acknowledgement of the beauty that could exist even after hardship. In that moment, the rancher felt a subtle shift within himself. He had always believed his life was complete with solitude and routine. But now he realized that companionship, built on respect and trust, could bring a richness he had never imagined. She stayed longer than one night, and each day added layers to their understanding of one another. She was cautious but not distant, careful but not timid. He was protective but not controlling, guiding but not demanding. Together, they found a rhythm, a shared life in the small routines of the ranch. Meals were eaten together, chores were divided, and conversations grew deeper, moving from simple observations to reflections on life, choices, and hopes for the future. The rancher found himself laughing more, noticing small joys he had long ignored: the sound of birdsong at dawn, the subtle changes in the sky, the comfort of a well-tended fire. She had a way of pointing out these moments, without drawing attention to them, teaching him to slow down and appreciate life's small wonders. In turn, he offered her stability, protection, and a space where she could rest without fear, a place where she could simply be herself. By the time the days turned into a week, the bond between them was unmistakable. It was quiet, steady, and unspoken, but present in every shared task, every glance, and every moment of mutual respect. She had come seeking a place to stay for a single night, yet her presence had become essential to the rancher's daily life. He realized that he had begun to care for her, not in a fleeting or superficial way, but deeply, as one cares for someone who has quietly become part of the heart of one's life. Evenings grew longer and filled with conversation, stories of the past mingling with dreams of the future. She spoke of her hopes, her fears, and the people she had loved and lost along the way. He shared his own history, a life of hard work, solitude, and quiet lessons learned from the land. In the exchange, they found understanding, compassion, and a growing sense of connection. Through simple acts, sharing a meal, tending the animals, watching the sunset, they discovered trust. Through hard work, careful observation, and mutual respect, they began to build a life that neither had anticipated, but both silently desired. She had come seeking shelter for a night, and in return, they found a bond that promised more than safety. It promised companionship, understanding, and the beginnings of love. Morning broke over the ranch with a gentle light, and the sound of birdsong filled the air. The Apache woman had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the ranch, waking early to help with chores and tending to the animals with quiet efficiency. The rancher, who had long lived alone, now found himself noticing her presence in ways that surprised him. Her laughter as she worked, the careful attention she gave to even the smallest tasks, and the calm way she handled challenges all began to feel essential to the life of the ranch. That morning, as he prepared to check the fence along the far edge of the pasture, he found her waiting with a basket in her hands. She had gathered eggs from the chicken coop and had fresh herbs from the garden she had begun to tend herself. "I thought these might help for breakfast," she said, her voice soft but steady. There was a natural pride in the way she carried herself, not boastful, only quietly confident in her contributions. The rancher smiled, accepting the basket. "You're more helpful than I expected," he said, though his tone carried more warmth than he intended. She simply nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. There was no need for words. They both understood the unspoken trust and growing connection between them. As the day went on, work continued. The fence needed repairing, and the rancher had to walk along the long boundary. Hammering posts and stretching wire, she followed, carrying tools, fetching nails, and offering her hands where needed. They worked together seamlessly, a silent rhythm forming between them. Occasionally, she would glance at him, her eyes curious, as if measuring the man he was and the life he had built. He, in turn, found himself noticing the determination in her movements, the way she adapted quickly, and the strength hidden beneath her calm exterior. During a break, they sat under a large oak tree near the riverbank. The sun was high, casting dappled shadows on the ground, and the soft sound of water flowing over stones created a peaceful atmosphere. She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "It's different here," she said. "Life is quieter, but it has its own lessons. You learn patience, observation, and respect. I can see that you've learned these too." The rancher paused, considering her words. It was true. Years of solitude had taught him patience and attention to detail. But until now, He had never shared it with anyone. Her presence changed that. "You have a way of noticing things," he replied. "Even small details matter. I suppose that's something we both understand." Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden cry of a horse. One of the animals had slipped near the riverbank, its legs tangled in the reeds. Without hesitation, the rancher ran toward it, and she followed closely, offering guidance and assistance. Together, they managed to free the horse, calming it with gentle hands and careful words. The effort left them both a little breathless, but the satisfaction of working together was evident in their smiles. As the sun began to descend, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold, they returned to the barn. The storm from the previous week had left the ground soft and muddy, and the work had been challenging, but they completed it with a sense of accomplishment. In the quiet of the barn, they tended to the animals once more, making sure each one was fed, watered, and comfortable. Later that evening, as they sat by the fire, conversation turned to personal stories. She spoke of her family, the lands she had known, and the journey that had brought her here. There was sadness in her voice at times, but also strength, a resilience forged through experience. The rancher listened carefully, impressed by the grace with which she shared her past. He realized that every hardship she had faced had shaped the woman before him, wise, strong, and independent, yet open to connection and trust. "You've carried much on your own," he said quietly, handing her a warm cup of tea. "I admire your strength." She accepted the cup, meeting his gaze with a calm confidence. "Strength is necessary, but it does not mean being alone. We all need help sometimes, even if we rarely ask for it." Her words lingered in the barn, carrying more weight than the simple tone suggested. Days turned into weeks, and the Apache woman stayed longer than anyone had anticipated. Each morning began with chores, each afternoon filled with work and quiet reflection, and each evening a time of shared stories and companionship. The rancher noticed subtle changes within himself. He laughed more easily, found joy in small details, and felt a sense of purpose beyond his previous routine. Her presence had transformed the ranch into a home in a way he had not expected. One afternoon, while working near the river, they discovered signs of a wild animal nearby. Tracks in the mud suggested a large coyote or perhaps a mountain lion had passed through. They worked carefully, setting up precautions to protect the animals, and the Apache woman suggested strategies drawn from her knowledge of the land. The rancher listened, impressed by her intuition and practical wisdom. It was clear that she was more than a guest, she was becoming a partner, someone whose judgment and care were as valuable as his own. As they finished their work, she paused to watch the sunset, the sky ablaze with colors that reflected in the calm river. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Even after danger or hardship, the world still offers moments like this." He nodded, realizing that her perspective had shifted his own. Life on the ranch had always been about survival and routine, but now he began to notice beauty, grace, and meaning in ordinary moments. She had brought a new depth to his existence, teaching him that strength and tenderness could coexist, and that companionship could make life richer. Evenings became times of quiet closeness. They would sit by the fire, not always speaking, but sharing a presence that was comfortable and reassuring. He began to notice her habits, the way she wrapped her hands around a cup of tea, the slight tilt of her head when she was thinking, and the calm steadiness of her breathing. These small details made him feel more connected to her, creating a sense of intimacy that did not need to be spoken aloud. One particularly cold night, the wind howled outside, rattling the barn windows and sending shivers through the structure. They huddled closer to the fire, sharing warmth and stories. She spoke of times when she had faced harsh winters, traveling through difficult terrain with little more than determination and faith. He listened, feeling awe for the resilience she had shown throughout her life. "You've endured much," he said quietly. "Yet here you are, still standing, still caring, still strong." She smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Endurance is not about surviving alone. It's about learning when to accept help, when to trust, and when to keep moving forward despite fear." Her words resonated deeply within him. He realized that while he had offered her safety and shelter, she had given him something equally important. The understanding that life could be shared, that trust could be built slowly, and that a bond forged through respect and care could grow into something lasting. As the weeks continued, the rancher found himself thinking of her constantly, even during moments of work or quiet solitude. Her laughter, her insight, and her calm determination had become inseparable from the life he had built. He recognized that he was no longer living merely for routine or survival, he was living for her, for the connection that had quietly taken root between them. One afternoon, while repairing a section of the fence that had been damaged by a storm, they worked in companionable silence. The sun was warm, the wind gentle, and the sounds of nature surrounded them. She handed him a hammer when he needed it, and offered encouragement when the work was challenging. In those moments, he realized that he no longer wanted her to leave, that her presence had become essential to his happiness. The evening came, and they sat together by the fire once more. She spoke of her dreams, simple yet profound. A safe place to live, a life with meaning, and the hope of sharing it with someone she could trust. He listened, feeling a deep sense of admiration and care. He understood that he wanted to be that person for her, the one she could trust, the one she could rely upon, the one she could share her life with. By now, the connection between them was undeniable. What had started as a single night of shelter had blossomed into a deep bond, rooted in trust, shared experiences, and mutual respect. The rancher realized that she had not only stayed at his ranch, she had become part of it, part of his life, and part of his heart. As the fire flickered and the stars began to appear in the night sky, he looked at her and felt something he had never allowed himself to feel before. Hope. Hope that companionship could exist even in the most unexpected circumstances, that love could grow slowly and quietly, and that two lives, once separate, could become intertwined in ways that neither had imagined. She had come to his ranch, seeking shelter for a single night. Yet she had remained, teaching him lessons of trust, resilience, and the quiet power of connection. He realized that the life he had once thought complete in solitude was now richer, fuller, and more meaningful because of her presence. In that quiet moment, with the fire burning low and the barn filled with the gentle sounds of night, the rancher understood something profound. She was no longer just a visitor, a guest, or someone in need of protection. She had become essential to his life, to the rhythm of the ranch, and to the beating of his heart. And he knew, without a doubt, that whatever came next, he could not imagine facing it without her by his side. The ranch had settled into a comfortable rhythm by now, with the Apache woman fully part of its life. Days were filled with work, tending to animals, repairing fences, and maintaining the land. Evenings brought quiet companionship, the firelight casting warm shadows across the barn as they shared meals, stories, and the simple pleasure of being together. For the rancher, the days had grown brighter, the work less lonely, and the world somehow more meaningful. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, the rancher noticed her already awake, gathering water from the well and humming a soft tune. He paused for a moment, watching her move with quiet grace, and felt a surge of warmth in his chest. It was no longer just care or respect that he felt, it was something deeper, something that had grown quietly over the weeks. He realized that her presence had become essential, not just to the ranch, but to his heart. She looked up and caught his gaze, smiling faintly. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying calm certainty. There was an ease between them now, a comfort that had been built through shared work, shared stories, and shared trust. The rancher returned her smile, feeling a quiet happiness he had not known he could experience. The day passed with the usual tasks, but there was a lightness in their movements. They worked together seamlessly, tending to the animals, repairing fences, and preparing food. Each task carried a sense of shared purpose, a rhythm born not from obligation but from mutual respect and care. The rancher found himself observing her often, not in a way that intruded, but with a deep appreciation for her strength, her wisdom, and her quiet presence. By afternoon, they had completed the day's work, and the rancher suggested they take a break by the river. The Apache woman agreed, carrying a small basket with fresh bread and cheese they could share. They sat on a flat rock, their feet dangling over the edge, watching the water flow calmly by. The river reflected the colors of the sky, and the gentle sound of the current filled the space between them. "It's peaceful here," she said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Even after all that life has thrown at us, there are places like this, quiet, steady, and beautiful." He nodded, thinking of the many years he had spent alone, unaware of the depth that companionship could bring. "Yes," he replied, "I never realized how much peace one could find when someone shares it with you." Her gaze met his, steady and thoughtful. "It's not just about sharing peace," she said. "It's about trust, understanding, and respect. Those are the things that make life richer." The rancher felt a warmth in his chest as he listened to her words. She had come seeking shelter for a single night. Yet she had taught him lessons far beyond the scope of that brief encounter. Trust had grown between them, respect had deepened, and a bond had formed that neither could ignore. Evening arrived, and they returned to the barn to prepare dinner. As they worked together, their conversation drifted to dreams and hopes for the future. She spoke of a life where she could feel safe, valued, and appreciated not just for her skills, but for who she was. He listened intently, realizing that he wanted to offer her exactly that. A place where she could belong, a life where she could thrive, and a heart that would cherish her. After dinner, they sat by the fire, the flames dancing and casting warm light across the barn. She looked at him, her expression calm but full of meaning. "You've given me more than shelter," she said quietly. "You've shown me trust, kindness, and respect. Those are rare gifts." He felt his heart swell, realizing that she had not only become part of the ranch, but part of his life in a profound way. "And you've given me something I never expected," he replied. "Companionship, understanding, and the knowledge that life can be shared, even after years of solitude." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that was comfortable, filled with mutual understanding and quiet emotion. The rancher realized that he had fallen for her, not in a hurried or shallow way, but deeply, completely, and with certainty. She had entered his life unexpectedly, but her presence had transformed it entirely. Days turned into weeks, and their bond only grew stronger. The Apache woman proved herself not just as a guest, but as a partner in every sense. She worked alongside him, made decisions with care and wisdom, and shared in the joys and challenges of ranch life. Her strength, intelligence, and kindness became inseparable from the rhythm of the ranch, and the rancher could no longer imagine life without her. One morning, while checking the animals, the rancher noticed the sun glinting off the river, and the way her hair caught the light. He felt a deep sense of admiration and love for her, realizing that she had quietly become the queen of his heart. She had never asked for his heart, never demanded love or attention. Yet she had earned it fully through her presence, her actions, and the bond they had built together. He approached her slowly, his heart beating faster than he expected. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low but sincere. She turned to him, her eyes curious and calm. "You don't have to say anything," she replied softly. "I can see it in your actions, in the way you care, in the way you share your life." He smiled, feeling both relief and certainty. "Yes, but I want you to know. You've become the most important part of my life. I cannot imagine this ranch, this land, or my heart without you in it. You are my partner, my friend, and the queen of my heart." Her eyes softened, and a faint smile spread across her face. "I never expected this," she said quietly. "I only came seeking shelter for one night. Yet I have found something far greater. I never thought I could belong somewhere again. But with you, I do." They embraced, a simple but profound acknowledgement of the bond that had grown between them. It was not a sudden or dramatic moment, but one filled with quiet certainty, mutual respect, and deep love. In that embrace, they both understood that life had changed forever. Not through grand gestures, but through trust, shared work, and the slow unfolding of connection. The days that followed were filled with small joys and continued partnership. They worked together in the fields, cared for the animals, and shared meals and quiet moments by the fire. Each day reinforced the bond between them, the knowledge that they had found something rare and valuable, a shared life built on trust, respect, and deep affection. She became the heart of the ranch, guiding decisions, offering insight, and providing strength. The rancher found himself leaning on her wisdom, valuing her opinions, and appreciating the quiet steadiness she brought to every challenge. In return, she found a safe place to belong, a home where she could be herself without fear, and a heart that cherished her fully. Seasons changed, and the ranch flourished under their joint care. The Apache woman had become inseparable from the land, the animals, and the daily rhythm of work. Her laughter filled the barn, her hands nurtured the animals, and her presence brought warmth to the rancher's life. He realized that she had not just stayed for shelter, she had stayed for life. And he could not imagine it any other way. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink, they sat together by the river. She rested her head on his shoulder, and he held her gently, feeling the steady warmth of her presence. "I never thought one night could change everything," she said softly. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Neither did I. But you came, and everything changed. You've given me life beyond solitude, purpose beyond routine, and a love I never thought I would feel again." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with quiet emotion. "And you've given me a home, a place where I belong, and a heart that values me for who I am. We found each other, not by chance, but by something greater than ourselves." The rancher nodded, feeling the truth in her words. Life had brought them together in an unexpected way, and together, they had built something enduring. She was no longer a visitor, no longer a guest, no longer someone seeking shelter. She was the queen of his heart, a partner, and a presence that made his life whole. As the night settled over the ranch, the stars appearing in a clear sky, they sat together in quiet contentment. The fire burned low, the animals rested peacefully, and the world seemed calm. In that moment, they both understood that the journey that had begun with a single night of shelter had led to a life shared, a love earned through trust and respect, and a bond that would last a lifetime. The rancher held her hand, feeling the strength and warmth in her grip. She rested her head against him, and together, they watched the night sky, knowing that the life they had built together was more valuable than anything either had imagined. One night had turned into a lifetime, and she had become the heart and soul of his life, his partner in every sense, and the quiet queen of his heart.